All right. I'm going to start. Thank you, first of all, for showing up, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you also to Lisa for helping organize this, and DCWeek, those of them who are here somehow. I appreciate it. And mostly I'm just grateful for this turnout. Wonderful. My name is Patrick Tucker. I'm the deputy editor of the Futurist magazine. Is my volume okay? Okay. It's not. It is a library, so I'm. Years of conditioning have told me to not be too loud. And
but please, fight it, so I can hear every word.
So the talk tonight is the world of 2030, and I'm just going to talk about interesting things that we've been covering in the Futurist magazine that relate to the year 2030, interesting trends. We'll be covering quite a few things. But first, what is a futurist? What is the Futurist magazine? Futurism is the analysis of how present-day trends will impact the future. And if that sounds very broad and open, then that's meant to be broad and open, because this is something that everyone does all the time. The Futurist magazine is published by the World Future Society. We are a non-profit organization based here in Washington, D.C. Some of our members include Buckminster Fuller and Robert McNamara. We're one of the few DC organizations to have both Al Gore and Newt Gingrich as a member. It's because the futurist is everyone's business. That's the thing. That's the thing about the future, is that if you're in DC and you're doing something wonky, then you're a little bit more pro-futurist than other people, but the future is something that we do all the time. Conceiving of the future, creating the future, planning for the future. All design is an act of futurism. If you're designing anything, you're designing it for people that have not yet met, that perhaps live hundreds of years into the future, and the greatest designs are those that endure. All strategy is an act of futurism. So it's something that we engage in all of the time. We at the Futurist magazine and at the World Future Society just believe that some people do it a little bit better than others as a result of practice, but there's nothing magic about it. And there are no silver bullets to the future either, because the future is not a place. It is not something that you trip over. The future is an idea. It is the most important idea in the history of our species. It animates everything that we do. And it is subject to constant revision. So you can't quite see it, but over the course of my talk, I might be referring to how probable different futures are. There's sort of a spectrum of probability. Any event in the future that is relatively high impact but low probability is what you might call a wild card or a black swan. It's something that you didn't anticipate happening that has an enormous impact. Any event in the future that is relatively high probability but low impact is very boring, and so we're not going to talk about that.
I want to say something.
Okay.
I was at the World Future Society event at the French Embassy last week.
Okay, yeah, it was Ken Mack.
Yeah, do you know an old guy named Joe?
Joe Coates.
Yeah.
He was great fun.
Yeah, I know Joe. I know Joe Coates.
He said futurists do not plan, which I didn't necessarily agree with, but he said that the planning part is not what the futurists go into. So I don't know if you have a comment about that, or Joe, or whatever. So.
Well, I've got some fundamental disagreements with Joe Coates. I think that we're all planning all the time. I mean, this is what we do, and this is where the World Future Society and Foresight can really help.
Sorry, but I know that since y'all aren't responsible for having being in this space, but you should know that changes are and the glass bounces the sound. So anyway, have it a little lower and still have all these keyboards here. That would help.
Okay,
It's
thank
not
you.
your fault. I know, but that's the way it is.
Okay.
I can hear you at my desk really well.
Okay, well,
Yeah, I just wanted to give you the information.
all right.
So project this way.
Yeah, so I'll keep sort of, maybe if I stand over here, and that which you can't hear me say, I'll, act out through hand gestures. So we will engage the future together. So, yes, that's pretty much the whole thing. High impact, low probability, wild card, black swan, the sort of thing that somebody has to plan for, but few people do. You can plan, but future. We're planning it all the time. It just doesn't stick to our plans. All right. So a couple of weeks ago, I gave this talk to a bunch of military guys, and they wanted me to talk about, really big demographic, economic, technological trends that they were going to have to plan war games around. And be really specific, and I think that I can hit on a lot of specifics for them. But in terms of the theme of the next 2 decades of life on this planet, particularly in the United States, I think it is this: dynamic tension between rising individuals and declining institutions. So one of the really fun things that I did this year at the Futurist magazine was talk to one of my favorite science fiction writers, and his name is Cory Doctorow. And I said, how do you make your science fiction stories? How do you write science fiction? And he said, pick something that's difficult, complicated, and expensive for people to do. Then imagine that thing becoming easy, simple, and inexpensive, and write about it, because that's what's happening. That's the future right now. As individuals increase capability as a result of information technology, as a result of distributed learning networks, they automatically pull power and influence away from institutions. And that tension is something that we're beginning to realize right now. And it is the major theme, I argue, of the next 2 decades, is how declining institutions and rising individuals negotiate this transfer of power that is extremely historic, is going to happen extremely rapidly and much faster than the sorts of historic power transitions that we're used to seeing. And it's because of the accelerating rate of technology. All right. Here's a few slow-moving glacial forecasts for the year 2030 that you can pretty much set your watch by because they're demographic. Demographic futures are the ones that you can have the highest degree of confidence in because demography moves really slowly. Oh.
That's good.
Can everyone still see it okay? So we know that in the year 2030, there's going to be slightly less than 400 million Americans or so. The country will be about 50% Caucasian. It's about 60% Caucasian right now. There's going to be many more single child and non-traditional households. This is something that we see rising relatively rapidly. It's already happened much more common in more developed economies. We've sort of flouted it, but when your economy no longer has a great big reason for lots of people to have extremely large households, you tend to see numbers of children go down. And we know that Americans are going to be increasingly time stressed. This is something that we can chart with a great degree of confidence. So this is sort of a portrait of America in the year 2030 based on lots of data that's available right now, and you can have a really high degree of confidence in all of those numbers.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the current approximate population?
It's been 320.
It was 300 million about 2 years ago. Yeah, so it's an increase of 100 million. These numbers were correct and are not correct. That's what happens in the future. This is a picture of the average global person in the year 2030, and throughout my talk a little bit, I'm going to be referring to a sort of phantom person that I call the average global citizen. So I want you to sort of, get a picture of what that person looks like in your mind. In terms of the broader global population of the year 2030, here's what we know. There's going to be about 9 billion people versus 7 billion today. We just hit 7 billion officially on Halloween. And this is something that's very interesting. Only 83% are going to have electricity versus 70% today, according to best estimates. That's because electrification rates in sub-Saharan Africa are really slow. There's just not huge incentive to build out extremely expensive infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is something that's, hopefully really surprising and even alarming because we're talking about the year 2030. And one of the things, we all have these notions of the year 2030 as this place with like flying cars and robots, and they're located at the robots. Plenty of robots around, the half-hour line. But that technology doesn't automatically distribute itself to many parts of the world. And 60% will live in cities versus 43% today. Who's heard this? Who's heard someone say that the majority of the global population of the future lives in a city? Who's heard someone say that? It's one of those themes of the future that gets repeated a lot. For good reason, because urbanization is a term that's inexorable, you can sort of track it. But even though we can have a very high degree of confidence about these particular projections, that 60% number is really very fungible. It's like all of the future, changeable. And that's because of something called rapid urbanization. So one of my favorite demographers is a fellow named Philip Rockeye, and he says that there's only going to be a very brief period where 60% of the global population lives in the city. It's going to sort of top out there, and then it's going to go down. And the reason it's going to go down is because of something called rapid urbanization. And you can see that sort of on display here in this slide of Lagos, Nigeria. So what rapid urbanization refers to is this trend where lots of people leave an agrarian setting. They leave behind an agrarian way of life, and they move into a major urban center before there is infrastructure for them, before there is employment for them, before there is anything like a social safety net. And they live in improvised dwellings on top of one another, subject to flooding, very little sanitation, very little employment or prosperity opportunity. And so what Philip Rockeye says is that you're going to have a bursting urban bubble over the next 2.5 decades, where you're going to have lots of people who had given up ways of life, who had abandoned systems of support in a rural setting to come to the city and then encounter a situation like this, which offers very little for them, and then remove themselves. So when we talk about the global citizen of the year 2030, we're talking about someone that might be rather transient, that isn't necessarily attached to a traditional rural way of life, but who isn't necessarily urban either. They're sort of caught in between. There's this part. Do you mind? All right, I'll just sort of just click this little button. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, in terms of dealing with that, this is where design and futurism as design can make a difference. This is a prototype for a movable house that is developed by a guy named Stanley Stanley out in California, who's actually a movie producer. And as you can see, it's basically just sort of a shopping cart house. And I'm not advocating this necessarily as the best possible solution for a constantly migratory population in the year 2030, but this is the sort of design that we could start making now that could have a big difference if we understand what that global citizen of the year 2030, what their needs are. So they make these for homeless people in Los Angeles. If you can get these out to places in the developing world in the next 2 decades, where you're going to start seeing this phenomenon, you can already begin to have a positive impact on life. See how I down is continue to say. What else do we know about this global citizen of the year 2030? Now we know that he or she, let's be female relative, she is going to be older than the average global citizen today. The average age today is 28. You wouldn't know this because in the developed world we hear a lot of news about how old we're getting, particularly in the West. The West is very old. The global population is actually quite young. It's 28. And by the year 2050, it's going to be 40. So they're going to be in the year 2030 a little bit closer to 30 or so. And they're going to be relatively poor. 95% of future population growth happens in the less developed world. So that means not what we used to call the first world. I don't know less developed world. So when we talk about this global citizen in the year 2030, this individual who's seeking to rise in capability, this is who we're talking about. They left behind an agrarian way of life where there were systems of support that were no longer economically viable. Perhaps they moved to a city, perhaps they left. They're looking at about 33 years old, and they probably come from a part of the world that we today don't consider the most developed part of the world. And so if we can have that person in mind, then we can make decisions in our own lives that can have a positive impact on that person's life later on. So here's some of the threats that the global citizen in the year 2030 will have to avoid. Permanent extinction. We are, according to some scientists that I speak to with NASA and the World Wildlife Foundation, on the verge of an extinction event that is the largest since the Permian extinction. Next, please. We also know that the global citizen of the year 2030 is very water stressed. Now, who here at some point has heard someone say that water is the new oil? Who's heard that?
Already.
Right.
Look at the cost of water.
Right. Well, so it was first uttered by one of the UN secretaries about 12 years ago, and it becomes more and more true all the time. So we've all heard it. Everyone here has heard it. Who here has done something about that in their own life? Who here exercises some sort of water conservation tactic in their life? Who owns a water barrel? Yeah. Yeah. Two.
You have a house.
That's true. Unless you want to, do a co-op rainbow in DC, and that's a mess. All right.
Isn't it a vocation? Yeah. But there's places where there won't be vocation.
Well, we'll get to that. All right. Because there's a lot to unpack in that statement that gets tossed around a lot, that water is the new oil. If water is the new oil, then this is the new Saudi Arabia. This is where a vast majority of the world's renewable freshwater resources live. Next, please. So, water, unlike oil, is renewable, falls from the sky, but it doesn't fall evenly upon the Earth's surface. There are 82 cubic meters of fresh water per person in Norway, and in Kenya there are 830 cubic meters of fresh water per person. I had to tell the military guys all this, and they were like, well, why does this affect us? This is the geostrategic environment that you have to live in, where there is an uneven distribution of a new, high-priced commodity, and it favors certain regions over others, and that's a strategic situation. Next. So, in a world where the Arctic North is the Saudi Arabia of water, one place that's not the Saudi Arabia of water is Saudi Arabia. So, the Nile, the Jordan, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Indus rivers are already extremely overtaxed. And thus you can expect high levels of tension and periodic outbreaks of violence, according to Michael Clare, the author of Resource Wars. So all of this is really dark so far. It's really bleak. And it is the future. I couldn't, be a responsible futurist and come here and just give you nothing but robots and rocket ships. This is the global reality for the global citizen of the year 2030. And this is why we think about the future now, so that we can begin to have an impact on that through policy, through personal decisions, but we have to start sooner rather than later. We also know that the global citizen of the year 2030 will be power-starved. Power demand is forecast to double by the year 2050, according to the IAEA, and that's, in all likelihood, an extremely conservative estimate. I think you're going to see that demand for power double by the year 2030. So, that's terrible, right? All of that is terrible. This is one of my favorite slides. It's not, I was told that you're supposed to put a picture in every slide, and I don't do that. Well, if you've seen my magazine, it's not pictury. So, but this is one of my favorite slides. Oh, go ahead, yes.
So at the beginning of all the threats that we're facing, you mentioned the Permian extinction event.
Yes.
Could you talk about that to just a second? What
Okay.
is that?
Well, that is a biodiversity collapse far larger than anything humanity has ever seen as a result of ecosystem encroachment, climate change, and other factors, but those two being the main driving forces behind a mega extinction event happening sometime between now and the year 2050. All of this is the future, and so all of it is avoidable. All of it is changeable because that is the future. So when we talk about future power needs, this is what our energy usage portfolio looks like today. We derive about 140 exajoules of power from petroleum, 90 from coal, only 55 exajoules of energy on a yearly basis from biomass. But biomass has the potential, correctly utilized, to yield 4,000 exajoules of energy on a yearly basis. That's huge. That's far more energy than we know what to do. And this is just biomass. Look at this. This is solar. We derive 0.2 exajoules of energy on a yearly basis from solar power. And solar power has the potential to yield over 4,000 exajoules of energy on a yearly basis. It's just sunlight. It's already free. We just haven't tapped it correctly. And there's others. There's about 5,000 or so exajoules in wind and other alternative fuels. So you need not sit here and fret about meeting all these needs. The solutions are actually all around us already. We just haven't utilized them correctly. So in keeping with this theme of empowering individuals who aren't necessarily hooked up with big infrastructure in the developing world, what are the power solutions that are going to work best for them? Are they great big on-the-grid solutions, like huge field of photovoltaics that feed into a power plant, or are they scalable? Are they evenly distributed? Are they person-to-person deployable, as you might say? So those are some of the things that we look at in the Futurist magazine. This is called this is an example of piezoelectrics. Some guy in MIT made a walkway of these bricks like this, and they use piezoelectric energy. So if you walk on them, you get a little bit of energy as the bricks rub against each other. And they determined that a whole bunch of people, about the size of this room, all jumping on these bricks at the same time, it would make like enough piezoelectric energy to bring a subway that was like stuck in a tunnel up to the platform. So if you can accelerate that, then you've got a power source that's powered like literally just by people. Polymer solar cells are another thing that we look at a lot. These are really, really thin solar pixels. Solar thin film. This is a company called Inbetween. They received a great big grant from about $9 billion in 2007 to perfect this sort of little thin coat-like solar panel that you can put on like, what you wear. And they hope to get it to the point where it yields about 1,000 watts per kilogram of just this little, not this particular one, but a kilogram of this would yield about 1,000 watts. It's just this really bendable stuff. And they hope eventually that they'll create some sort of photovoltaic solution that you can apply like a lens. So these types of energy solutions, I think, are going to catch on because they speak to that global citizen of the year 2030, the one that doesn't necessarily have a hookup with infrastructure, doesn't necessarily have a hookup with a place that's on the moon. If you can empower that person, and you do away with a lot of the great big problems that we fret about because they seem really large, way up high, and we're not dealing with them on an individual level. This is an interesting prediction that I heard this year. Solar power will be cheaper than both fossil fuels and nuclear power within 5 years. So who said this? Mark Little, he's the global research director for General Electric. Now, Mark Little wants you to buy a photovoltaic panel from Mark Little. And so it's good that he's optimistic like that. At the same time, this has to exist within the realm of possibility. He's not the only person to have said that. How does this, if this becomes true in the next 5 years, how does this change our politics? How does this change the political discussion that we have in DC, and vested interests that are constantly battling with one another to curry our favor? All of a sudden, you've got a great big disruption, right? You've got a great big shift. Within 5 years, incredibly ambitious prediction. All right, year 2030. water's the new oil, right? Water's the new oil. We all have to be freaked out about that. We do it. This is the SW6 Max by a Japanese company called Nito Dinko. It is the most efficient water filter in the world. It's a reverse osmosis polymer filter that actually filters water at the nanoscale, so it turns salt water fresher than fresh water. It actually removes more salt from salt water than you get when you put your glass to the tap if you're outside of Washington and you get fresh water. Right? It's amazing. So we're saved, right?
No.
Theoretically, we're saved. No, you're right. Not yet. So this technology to use costs $650 per acre foot of water. Who thinks that's expensive?
What is an acre?
Yeah, but what is an acre foot of water? I mean, is it worth it? The average Arizona home uses about 1 acre foot of water per year. So $650 is your yearly water bill. With this, it works out to English major, so like 50 or so bucks a month is your water bill. That's annoying, but very doable, right? Really doable. Except that that doesn't factor in the amount of water you need to raise all the food you eat, which on a person-to-person basis is about 5,000 liters. You eat 5,000 liters of water a day. And that's not tied in there, nor is the fact. Yes, in food. All the food that beef and greens and all of that stuff.
You don't physically take it, that's what it takes to produce that food. That's what
Exactly. Yes. Yes. 5,000 liters. So, and 10% of that number is energy too. So the price of energy affects that number going forward. So water is still sort of oil, but there's other solutions and strategies we can bring to bear that exist already to keep that from happening. Because this thing does exist. This isn't future technology. This is actually a year old. Here's a different technology that keeps water from being oil. This is EQ of Stanford. He's the creator of a silver nanofiber water filtration system. It's basically the silver nanowire, and you run electricity through it, and it zaps all of the pathogens out of the water, and it filters it that way. It's amazing. So, I don't know who's recently tried to make silver nanofiber. It's really difficult. And it's sort of expensive. But there's a company in Korea named Tech that's already started producing nanofiber. Okay? So, again, theoretically, we're saved, right? We can use this filtration system that this brilliant Stanford professor made with this mass-producible material, and water no longer be oil, right? So I give sometimes this talk to people around the world, and some people are from the developing world, and I kind of expect something like, I don't know, accolades or admiration. I'm very insecure, and so I want them to say thanks. And I gave this talk to someone who's actually from China said, this is patented technology. We're never going to get to use this. This will never, come down to where I can use it unless we decide to break the patent. So that's a big question, all right? I mean, that's one of the most important questions I think we have. Who owns the technologies for massive problem solving going forward? This is a slightly different take on the whole water problem. This is called the Life Straw. It's a personal water filtration device. It's scalable. It's just a carbon filter. It's nothing particularly high tech. And you suck the water through it and it cleans the water. So it was part of the Copperfield Design Museum show. You can sort of see it in use here. And it's scalable, it's one per person. I think that it's a solution that speaks more to what the global citizen of the year 2030 lives like, but at the same time, it's not the idyllic solution. And this is one of the big questions that we have to ask ourselves. I think this is one of the most important questions of the 21st century. Are we going to solve one big problem for lots of people, or are we going to solve 9 billion little problems? Because if you can, or do you apply like one solution in one place and another solution someplace else? We don't know, but that to me is the big question of the next 2 decades. Which problems do you solve? The same little one over and over, or one great big one? This is a sort of in-between solution that we covered in my magazine. I really like this idea. It's called a play pump. There's a guy named Trevor Feld in South Africa, put about 200 of these in different schools in South Africa. And in South Africa, kids actually play with playground equipment. They like playground equipment, believe it or not. So what happens is the kids lay on the merry-go-round. It's a water displacement pump. It pulls water up from about 100 meters below the surface. They keep it up here in this tower, in this case. And, where it stays, and then they use it to water vegetables and things like that. So, I know that this sometimes isn't sort of like the stuff that you want to hear from like a futurist. People are waiting for the big tech stuff, but this is more amazing to me than a lot of the expressions that I hear all the time. As soon as they put these playgrounds in these schools, they realized improved education for girls, because a lot of the girls wouldn't go to school when they were having their menstrual cycle, because it was like a sanitary issue. They were very embarrassed and they were very self-conscious, and it began to affect their education or the school that they used. So this guy solved that by putting this play pump in the school. Water was cleaner, so fewer upset stomachs. Kids started growing vegetables. They became healthier, academic performance improved. Here's an important one. Children no longer have to walk for kilometers a day to bring back water. So in lots of parts of the developing world, the local water politics are absolutely Dostoevsky. People have to walk, mostly women and children, often several kilometers a day to find water and bring it back. And that water is in the jurisdiction of another village. And the amount of coercion and corruption that has to happen around the transaction of just getting water on a daily basis is amazing. And so you can solve that problem with a merry-go-round. The potential exists to generate electricity because it is, it's an energy generator. You can funnel that into electricity. All of a sudden, this village that, according to slide number 3, perhaps doesn't even have electricity on a grid setting, suddenly has electricity next to us. All right. So in the developed world, where we live, lots of big problems that we can bring technology to solve. Next, please. All right. Who knows the MIT Smart Cities plan? Okay, a few people. This was like the most awesome thing that I had seen in a while. We broke this. Well, we covered this last year. One of the designers of this program wrote a great big thing for our July issue. And this is what I think transportation in Washington, D.C. is going to look like in the year 2030. It basically looks like this. These little cars stack like this. They've got motors in each wheel. But the revolutionary thing is that it's a cooperative model like Zipcar, except it works with a bicycle and with a scooter. So you pay a subscription rather than you own one piece of machinery. And you get access to a scooter and a bicycle and a car. So you can take your scooter to the grocery, and when you pick up your groceries, take the car home. All right? And it just stacks like this. It's really cool, right? Next place. So the thing that it solves that other forms of public transportation cannot solve is what's called the first mile, last mile problem. You're always about a mile away from public transportation, wherever you are. We're about, I don't know how many blocks, like 5 or 6 blocks, and if I've got a lot of stuff, then I'm going to be annoyed by it. But this is public transportation that sort of meets you exactly where you are. And it's not a mile away. And you're dealing with a population in the United States that's much older. That's a real draw. And I think that there's tremendous appetite for distributive owning in cities like this, because owning a car is a hassle and annoying. But owning a subscription or access to a car, that's what you really want. Next, please. Here's the other thing about it that's really cool. So, because these cars are cooperatively owned, all of the energy stored in the batteries is also cooperatively owned. So you can park them, and all the leftover battery juice can cycle back into the grid. And they calculated that in Boston alone, that's like 4,000 watts. like, there's about 30 cars, it's 4,000 watts of energy. Because, when you park your car, all the juice in the battery just sits there, it's not utilized. If you're sharing the car with everyone else, then everybody can use that power. So I really like that. The way they design it, it works alongside solar panels, and it's just a big cycle like this. Next one. That slide didn't work so well. I was sort of expecting more Wi-Fi presence. But it's, all right. So that's one potential solution to future gridlock, cooperative owning of different vehicles. Who knows what Stanley is? Okay, a few people know what Stanley is. Stanley won the 2005 DARPA Grand Challenge. It was a robotic car. It drove 131 miles in 6 hours and 53 minutes, entirely by itself. Completely robotic. 2007, they did another Grand Challenge event. He's gotten this. They did another Grand Challenge event in a big city, and the car in that setting was a Carnegie Mellon project, and it actually did even better. Google just debuted a self-driving car in Los Angeles. So, self-driving cars, they already exist, and they are going to be giving us stuff by the year 2030 because they already exist. So it's not actually a big leap. Next slide. This is a Japanese robot from a company, and it actually walked from Tokyo to Kyoto, which is, it took about 49 days to do it. And it's just this adorable robot that walked, a really long distance. So this stuff already exists, and if it exists now, then it's going to be part of our world in the future. And I think that when we're talking about robotic delivery of goods and integration of robotic solutions into our life, there's a lot of legal issues that surround that right now in the United States. You can't exactly have a self-driving car in the US. The Google team that was working with the self-driving car in Los Angeles had to have a human operator standing by in case the car hit somebody. In Japan, a lot of those issues completely melt away. Just because the legal environment is different, the culture is completely different. In many ways, they're sort of already ground zero for a lot of the trends we're talking about. They've always been in a sort of scratch country. 4 people in the rural countryside is over the age of 65, 25 people is over the age of 60 in the country as a whole. And so they're much more willing to integrate these types of robotic personal capability enhancers into life. And so I think within the next 5 years, you're going to see robotic delivery of packages in Japan. That's the proof of concept you're going to see here in the United States. So there's, why would we have this? Why would we have robotic transportation of goods? And this is sort of why. This is the city car that you saw earlier. You can imagine that without making room for a human, it could be much smaller. And this is a Ford Explorer. So a lot of the energy inefficiency that's tied up in our cars right now is due to the fact that they're designed to shepherd around these delicate, whiny, indecisive, biological organisms that, don't know what they're doing and are full of demand. So if you can remove that annoying organism from the wheel, then you can make the transportation much smaller and much more efficient. And when you realize those efficiency benefits, you're saving energy, a major goal for the global citizen of the year 2030. So imagine that city car getting just sort of much, much smaller. Like I said, there's legalistic and cultural obstacles to that, and so I think we'll see proof of concept in Japan kind of jump over our way. Here's something else that we're beginning to see right now that's going to play a much larger role in all of our lives in the next 2 decades, and that's what's called the Internet of Things. So the presence of data sensing and computation leaving the realm of the iPhone and integrating itself more fully in objects that we come across just casually. Floor, windows, lights, any of this stuff can be outfitted with sensors, or you could save a lot of money and just create a few sensor locations around here that can do all the sensing that you might want some other surface to do. this is called a infant sensor bed. They're Dutch. And it's this bed that you lay on, and it does biophysical monitoring for you. So it's collecting data about you as you sleep, and they actually already use these in hospitals and in jails. So, yeah. Here's a prediction that I think is probably very credible. In 10 years, tablet PCs, netbooks, and laptops will be extinct, replaced by new devices yet to be conceived. And who said this? Ramos Suzuki. He's the vice president of Intel's architecture group. So he's talking about the obsolescence of everything he actually does within 10 years. And that's why I find that projection kind of credible. Laptops, PCs, netbooks, extinct. Next slide. So what replaces them? This is a design from Philips, and it's this mirror that you go up to, and it takes sort of biophysical readings from you, and then uses those to create sort of like a health profile for you. And right now, this technology is very crude, but you can imagine that within 20 years, when you go to your mirror in the bathroom, or when you interact with different objects, you're going to have you'll be encountering an artificially intelligent entity that will have a very full understanding of how you're going to go about your day, and they'll be able to give you very specific bits of advice about how to optimize your health over the course of the day. And it will be a little bit weird for many of us, but for younger people, it won't be weird at all, because they already understand the amount of data that they produce. They're beginning to understand how the data analytics can lead to a transparent life. And so, it won't be very strange for them. This is a device called a Fitbit that we covered in also a couple of years ago. And it's just this little clip that you hook onto your, it's like a speedometer, or little pedometer that you hook on your shirt while you jog. And it takes biophysical readings of pulse and things like that, respiratory activity, except it uploads them to a website, and you can share it with your doctor, or your running group, or across other people. And what they found, actually, last year, was that people would keep it on during sex. And so it would take readings of how vigorously you went about doing that activity, which is all people would show it to everybody. It was just really strange. I mean, it's sort of pornographic, but at the same time, it's not sexy. Because I don't know. That's the sort of real-time transparency that we're beginning to experience around everything that we do. Should we want to, there'll be real reasons that we'll want that sort of constant understanding of everything that's going on with us. Because the more data we have, the better able we are to predict things.
How does that all add into human nature to gamify things?
Like how can we gamify your
Well, last time we hit a 180 heart rate. Let's see if we can do a 190.
I don't know. That's a good question. This is that would be the next challenge. Once you've optimized, how do you redefine what optimal health is? Because everything else is dull. I find myself doing that all the time, but I'm sort of weird.
There's a Fitbit competitor that monitors sleep, and so it can tell how restful a sleep you get at nighttime, and it gives scores that you post to the web. And now the gamification of it is people are trying to have the best score, and who can get the most REM sleep or whatever it is, and post it up. And so they got stats and levels that you compete against the people online.
Right.
It's called the ZEO sleep monitor. ZEO. I got one.
Yes.
That's your goal.
8 hours is just fine.
But if you take that 30 years out, one potential outcome of that, maddening pursuit for all the time better, all the time wider understanding of what's going on is, the whole Gattaca scenario. Who's seen Gattaca? Right. Gallagher posits a future where there are two different sort of classes of people. There are people that were designed from their genome at birth for optimal health and intelligence, and people whose parents couldn't afford the priciest premium genetic therapies, somatic gene therapies, when they were removed. Now, here's the thing that terrifies me about genetic science as it exists in the year 2011. Through pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, there's actually a ton of different things that you can screen for, and you can select among a wide variety the healthiest possible embryo for implant. And you can also screen embryos for a lot of things that we don't know yet whether or not they are, what they do. Because the vast majority of what we call intelligence is actually something that's cultural. I mean, we have a cultural definition of intelligence. And so there's no easy genetic answer for how to create that. But if you're talking about a country in the year 2030 that's facing an enormous economic burden from an aging population, and they have a mandate to decrease the amount that is spent in that country on health care, I think that you might find a country begin to experiment with pre-implantation genetic diagnostic mandates, which scares me a lot because after speaking with Ian Wilmot, the geneticist who cloned Dolly the sheep, he says that there's a lot of things that can go right, and perhaps you might give rise to a population of like super babies, or you could create a generation of people who all suffer from completely preventable birth defects. And we have no clue. And he cloned a sheep, so I trust his statement more than someone who's really excited about it. But because of the decreasing cost of healthcare in places where you have a rapidly aging population, I expect some country to attempt this within the next 100 years. Next 100 years.
Is this related at all to previous slide you had that 95% of the population growth is going to be in poor countries? But what do you think the implication for that will be?
Well, but those countries are also a little bit younger than the developed West. It could be any country where there's just a really high amount of money that has to be allocated on a yearly basis to taking care of elderly people. And we know in the developed world where we are, the amount of money allocated for elder care is supposed to double by 2050 conservatively and triple, quite possibly, by 2050. That's in this country. So, universities, school. This is an interesting quote. In 30 years, universities, as we have traditionally known them, will be bearing wastelands, says Peter Drucker, who actually teaches at a university. Next.
But when did he say that?
He's dead.
Yeah, he's dead.
But so how long ago did he say it?
I'm not sure. I do not know, and I will Google that as soon as I can. I'm not exactly sure when he said that.
Less than 10 years.
Right.
Well, that's the thing. So we can say that now, and it sounds like he's stating something that seems like an obvious trend. The earlier, before he said that, the more miraculous that statement was. I think that it's sort of miraculous now, considering that I like universities. I think a lot of people take for granted that universities get into existence. And in many ways, perhaps this is the university of the future. So this really illustrates that tension that we were talking about earlier between the rising individual and the declining institution. There is a doctor, nurse, and midwife shortage of 2.3 million people by the year 2050. So this is medical, there's a dearth for medical education. And there's lots of parts of the world that can't wait for someone to build a medical school there. And so the sooner we can begin to realize real positive effects, real positive proofs of concept with online education, and the faster we can solve this problem. But there's enormous institutional resistance to making this work correctly. And I'm not sure who wins that. Sorry, so. So.
You did brought that a little bit. Brought up the projector.
For might just let it go because no one people. We'll just sort of. Thank you.
Heat on it or something. Not bad.
Alright, we're not off the top, but it's okay. We'll just sort of go back and forth. All right. So commerce in the future. Here's something that we can have a high degree of confidence in. There will be no single reserve currency. Right now, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. It's how we nominate oil. That goes away by the year 2030, more likely with a high degree of confidence in that. That has an inflationary effect on oil and other commodities in that time frame. So, bullish on oil. Yes. Rise of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. These are all very slow-moving glacial futures that we can sort of see happening right now. Here's one that's less widely discussed, and that is the structural change toward non-formal high-tech sealed pools in the place of formal employment. So, it's that whole jobless thing. Next slide, please.
Freelance nation, in other words.
Freelance, exactly. Right now, if I want something done, I have a global talent pool to choose from. But we have a lot of institutional resistance to me being in that talent pool and really making my services available. We have a lot of institutional resistance to different people using that talent pool. Being a freelancer sucks. You don't have a social safety net. It's really hard. You have a social safety net if you have a job, unless you form together like a union that buys each other health insurance. But yet at the same time, if I want to make something and I want to find the best talent in the world, then I should be able to sort of open it up to anybody. So this is that tension that we talked about earlier between rising individuals and declining institutions. Declining institutions hold benefits. They hold influence over the way people access healthcare and access a lot of other things. But individuals are outgrowing the need for formal institutions of employment. Or they're not. So this is an interesting chart. This is productivity growth versus employment. Now historically, big bumps in unemployment were followed by big bumps in productivity. And that resulted in more profits and unemployment going down. So over the course of the 20th century, at the end of every decade, there were fewer jobless people than at the beginning of that decade, because what would happen was you'd have a big breakthrough, you'd have a company that would lay off a lot of workers, you'd have an economic dip. The company would invest in new innovative technologies, and perhaps they wouldn't need more workers right away, but they would realize profits, again, from cost cutting. And when they realized profits from cost cutting, they would be higher because demand would be high again. And so unemployment would go back down. And that kept happening here, and here in 2002 as well, over the course of the 20th century. But look at these productivity gains right here, right? That's the internet. That's huge. And I think that, I'm not alone in this, there's a MIT professor named Andrew McCaffrey who's actually at the Sloan School of Management. He says that this cycle is now broken. And we've reached a point where increases in productivity will not necessarily be followed by decreases in unemployment. And so what you have is a permanently high unemployment among medium-skilled workers. Next slide.
You mean productivity or not?
Productivity defined as output per worker per unit. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. So here's a wild card that could change aspects of that future. This is a rapid prototyping machine. It's sort of like a desktop factory. And it creates these little doodads, okay? These are little tiny component parts. You can buy one of these yourself and make these little things. So right now, we in this country are really worried about losing our manufacturing base to China and other places where you have lots of capital for low wage, right? Imagine a future in the next 2 years where molecular manufacturing combines with this sort of rapid prototyping technology to empower an entire nation like garage entrepreneurs to compete with each and every one of them to compete with China. It sounds a little bit like optimistic, but this is kind of what Rodney Brooks, the roboticist who made the Roomba robot vacuum cleaner, is working on now. He's working on a factory robot that's like an iPod robot. It's going to retail for less than $5,000. And unlike factory robots that can only do one specific thing, require huge integration costs, and aren't actually that useful, this robot will be actually like a fourth pair of hands and half a brain. And it will empower an entire nation of garage businesses to compete better, much better, with China, or let people in China compete better with other people in China. These rapid prototyping machines are going to get much better. They exist right now, and DARPA is actually going to put 1,000 of these in high schools across the country over the next year, because they understand. Regina Dugan, the new head of DARPA, who I love, understands that manufacturing is key to national security, and we have to bring back that manufacturing sector. It's not going to be by recreating what existed. It's going to be by turning, manufacturing into something that happens in a garage, but that has where every garage manufacturer has a global audience. Next slide. So, rise of, we still have work in the future, but joblessness becomes more of a permanent factor as we lose social safety nets associated with formal positions. And Occupy Wall Street is in many ways symptomatic of this transition towards a post-industrial economy where high unemployment is sort of the new normal. And we haven't figured out how to navigate that yet. We haven't figured out what to do about a very small group of people realizing tremendous productivity gains and how to distribute the profits from those productivity gains. Next slide. Oh wait, this is the takeaway of that. It's never been easier to launch a company based on a disruptive technology, and it's never been easier to lose your job to disruptive technology. Next slide. All right, so this is Brian Wong. He's a 20-year-old entrepreneur. He's had 3 companies so far. His current company is called Kip. And when you play mobile video games, and you reach a really high level, right now you don't get anything from that, you just reach a really high level. His company gives you a real world reward. So like you get a coupon for pizza, you get a coupon for coffee, and it's part of what a phenomenon I see happening a lot more frequently, and that's alternative currencies. As we move away from formal employment and move towards different types of work situations that exist outside of jobs, we'll be relying on completely different currencies to negotiate exchanges. Like Facebook credits as an example, $10. The World Bank estimates that the total value of the virtual economy, this is just stuff people trade in video games back and forth, is about $3 billion. So this is a major trend in the future because before, if you wanted to trade something with somebody, you had to understand who they were, you had to understand what they said was actually what they said that it was, and you had to have a lot of information about them before you agreed to make some sort of exchange with them for something other than a clear store of value, which is how currency sort of came into existence. Because currency gave everyone a common means of exchange. You no longer need a common means of exchange. We still like a common means of exchange. A lot of people still like a common means of exchange, but you don't need one anymore. And so there's going to be a lot more people that are making alternative economies that exist in addition to the formal economy that exists that we have to live in all the time. Next. Next. So, in addition to that, I believe that if we take today's IT trend, what we're just talking about, increased capability for little tiny companies, enabling them to compete on a global scale, we take that 30 years into the future, and what you come up with is a robotic company that exists on its own self-made island. That's the future. I'll explain why. All right. So if you create an island, you don't have to adhere to certain laws, certain key laws that affect other places. And island building technology is one of those information technologies that's getting increasingly better. And robotic companies are, if you want maximum leverage in a really fast-paced commerce environment, you're going to rely increasingly on different artificial intelligences to get you that leverage. So right now, if I want to form a company that's based around getting, let's say, somebody in Angola a water purification system that's usable, that's made of locally sourced materials, how do I do that? I need a logistics firm like Boozout and Hamilton. In the year 2030, using a globally dispersed array of sensors and data that's stored all over the world, a program can detect that need as soon as it occurs, detect the best possible solution for it, find the talent, create the product, deliver the product, and dissolve itself. And all of this can happen robotically. I can own that company and never be aware of it, wake up the next morning and be the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And then you have to create new areas of real estate for those sorts of companies to operate. It's completely speculative, and I wouldn't put too much money on it. Thanks. This is how it would work. This is it's from a company called Shinzu, actually sort of designed man-made islands. And they float like this, like lily pads, and then a great big wind comes along, they collapse, and so that they're safe from big ocean weather events, and then they use these pulleys to pull the tower back up. Fascinating. I think that we'll be seeing a lot more vertical agriculture as we get better at genetically modifying different food sources, because you need to, this won't be able to produce a lot of yield for conventional crops, so you need some sort of genetically modified alternative vegetable that can subsist with slightly lower sunlight, or it does better in a hydroponic environment. Backbone wheat, get ready for backbone wheat. I think that it's coming, and the reason why is because replacing farm-raised wheat with backbone wheat decreases carbon emissions by 80%. It's huge. Just from eating like rubber meat.
What is backbone meat?
It's artificial meat. It's meat that's sort of created in a lab, like what you see here. It's not connected to an animal that had to eat a lot and die.
So it's made out of some kind of protein vegetables, or?
Well, it's tissue. It's like flesh tissue.
It's actual meat.
Yeah. It's just not
attached to an animal at any point in its
yeah.
birth cycle.
It's sort of similar to the tissue that a lot of people use for grafting organ transplant now.
More of a chance of eating something like this is being that people becoming more vegetarian.
Yeah.
Good point. Next slide. This is a good question, right? So the vegetarian Dr. Frankenstein version of that is genetically engineered saltwater algae. So saltwater algae is in many ways sort of the perfect crop for the future if we can genetically engineer it to the point where it requires much less nitrogen. And that's because saltwater algae doesn't compete with conventional crops for water, which is hugely important in a water-stressed world, where 2/3 of the global population doesn't have access to water, or lives in a water-stressed environment, excuse me. And you can eat it for food, or with something as small as like an olive press, because it's a lipid, you can squeeze it and get something burning. So this is a scalable energy and food solution for a globally distributed population that's not necessarily hooked up with on-the-grid infrastructure. It is genetically engineered saltwater algae. Food and fuel of the future. Ponzi. Next slide. It's Ponzi. Here's the thing. Because it doesn't compete with other crops for fresh water, and because you can irrigate it with seawater, it turns places like the Sahara, the Middle East, that great big section that we were talking about in slide 2 that doesn't have electrification, it turns all of that into viable, productive real estate. And empowers, people that today live in the developing world to, suddenly they're sitting on something like green gold, and they're able to create lots of prosperity and infrastructure in cities, and all of that foreign development aid that somehow never gets to them all of a sudden exists because they live close enough to the sea to irrigate this crop. And the only technical barrier is figuring out a synthetic strain of algae that doesn't need as much nitrogen as conventional algae does. And the world changes remarkably. It's so much better. I almost can't believe it. Once someone, probably Craig Venture, because this is the project that he's working on right now, once someone overcomes that one technical barrier, life on this planet changes a lot for a lot of people, and it gets a lot better. Assuming that someone can make something tasty out of algae. You can make something, we live in Washington, D.C. This is the most resourceful gastronomy environment in the country, so I'm very optimistic on that. Who knows who this is?
Just right, first one.
Yes. So this is sort of the tie-up. These are sort of less probable shapes of the year 2030 according to some. He has complete faith in it. I've talked to him a number of times. Ray Kurzweil is the winner of the National Technology Medal in 1998. He's a artificial intelligence designer and IT designer. And he says that we're on the verge of an explosion of computational intelligence. By the year 2020, $1,000 will purchase you the computing power of the human brain, so you'll be able to buy something like an iPhone or a device, or have access to a human brain, that level of computational power for $1,000. And by 2030, $1,000 will purchase you the computational power of all human brains that exist on this planet. Next slide, please. And the reason that happens is because of the exponential rate of technology development. So he says that we're used to thinking of technology development like one innovation begets another, and he says, think of it this way. One innovation begets two, which begets four, which begets eight, and it looks like a linear progression until you get to a point where you're multiplying really large numbers by really large numbers. And then you're at like the hockey stick of the curve, and that's where we are right now. So by the year 2030, next slide please, we have used huge advances in information technology to create health solutions that today sound completely speculative. One of them is nanorobotics. These are robots that are 1 billionth of a meter in size. They would ingest them. They would go about their bodies repairing damage on a cellular basis, delivering oxygen to our lungs, enabling us to hold our breath for an hour, giving us super strength, and essentially curing aging. He sees nanorobotics as the step to us living to be about 300 years old, and this happens around the year 2030, the singularity, 2045, if he's walking back from that a little bit. So we'll be ingesting these billionth of a meter sized robots into our system, and they'll be taking care of us, communicating with one another and with other systems to fix every cellular problem that we might ever have the moment that we have it. Next slide, please. And in this future, these nanorobots might be able to be powered by a radioactive isotope called gadolinium-148 that they could use to vary energy to the parts of our body that need them, so that we wouldn't have to eat. That's the food pill. That's the only feasible food pill scenario, is nanorobots powered by radioactive isotopes. And we'll know if it's possible in the next 20 years or so. Next slide. It's very unlikely, just so you all know. So don't put a ton of money on it. And the other wildcard scenario is geoengineering. The GAO just made a huge geoengineering report, and that assumes that I've kind of screwed up the climate so bad, and we've waited so long to deal with it that we begin to manipulate the weather through next slide, please. Very bizarre technologies, like huge ships that scoop up seawater to blast them into the air to make the clouds whiter, so that we can reflect more of the sun rays back into space. And this hopefully saves us from the worst effects of climate change, but has many other unpredictable consequences as well. So that's it. That's the future. All of it is the future, and none of it is the future, because the future, like I said, is not a place. It's something that we're inventing. It's something that we're inventing a little bit tonight. It's something that we're going to leave here and invent. It's all changeable, but ultimately it's an idea. It's an idea that you have. It's an idea that I hope you will want to change. And next slide. Thank you all so much for coming. That's it. That's my talk. Thanks.